The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady by Charles Mingus. Charles Mingus has a very aggressive, almost a violent take on jazz. As a matter of fact, when he talks about the Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, Charles Mingus actually hesitated to use the term jazz to describe it. Instead, talking about it in terms of like a ethnic folk dance music in an attempt to sort of dodge the emotional and cultural baggage of the term jazz. And his hesitancy to line up with the concept of jazz is pretty indicative of where Charles Mingus was as a composer. He was, in many ways, I think, to jazz in the early 60s, what Frank Zappa was to rock in the early 70s. And when you look at guys like Count Basie, like we saw last year, I talked a lot about the cleanliness of his music and how things are sort of very pristine and they line up so well. And this is because Count Basie was trying to get his music to cross over into the mainstream. At this point, Charles Mingus was not interested in that. As a matter of fact, a lot of what he was doing in the late 60s was a reaction to the racial injustice that he saw and suffered under during this time in music and American history. And even if you try to look at the Black Saint and the Sinner Lady in terms of it being sort of a normal jazz album, there's a lot of things that will break down about it. It has a lot of loops in some ways, like looped figures that sort of predictive of where music would be going in the future, I think. And also not really clear melodic material. Like these riffs are kind of the things that are the basis of the album, but there's not a head and where they follow the chords. It's a very carefully orchestrated album, and one that has a very carnivalesque feel, really embodying chaos more than smoothness. Now, the Black Saint and the Sinner Lady was actually conceived as a one long form piece that Charles Mingus was encouraged by his record company to chop into smaller pieces. And it's also a triumph in some ways of using the studio as an instrument. And this is something that was an innovation in jazz in the early 60s, where he made the whole recording in one day. The basis of the album was really, legend has it, all recorded in one day. But then he spent some time literally with a razor blade and with a tape, and was cutting and making old school edits and splicing things together in a way that predicted what Miles Davis would be doing 6 years later, quite famously on Bitches Brew. Charles Mingus kind of did that first in this album. And on top of that, all the alto sax in this album was not recorded at the same time as the rest of the album. About a week after the recording was made, he called in Charlie Mariano to play alto saxophone over the recordings that he had and would just point at him and tell him when to play. Assuming at that point maybe even some editing had been done. So he was really anticipating the way that the studio could be used as an instrument in jazz before really it was became a standard thing. And it's an album that's both a daunting listen and also an approachable one. It relies a lot on dramatic tempo changes, explosive dynamic shifts, but at the same time, it has an aspect of it that's inviting and approachable to the listener. Some fans of Mingus call this one of his most important and maybe his magnum opus work, because it balances chaos and form and social outrage and makes it really one of the more significant recordings in his personal repertoire as well as of the late 20th century.